Mother dragged me outside barefoot, looked me straight in the eye and said, "You were just a burden I tolerated." Then she slammed the door, left me shivering on the porch while her husband laughed. But when the money stopped, she called 107 times in one night. Ever wonder how a family can throw you out like garbage, then beg to be let back in once the cash runs dry? Before we dive in, where are you listening from? Drop what betrayal really sounds like. The front gate creaked just like it used to. Same sharp groan, same rusted tension in the hinges, like the house itself didn't want visitors. I paused at the bottom step, my hands full, bag in one hand, a gift basket in the other, wrapped carefully in ribbon, homemade apple butter, her favorite lavender candle, and a new pair of gloves. Oregon winters bit deeper than most places. The porch light was on, flickering a little like it always had, casting long shadows across the siding. I hadn't been back in months, not since the last call ended with her hanging up on me. But I was home for the holidays. That had to mean something. When she opened the door, she didn't smile. "Hey, Ma," I said quietly, forcing a grin. "You look—" "Come in, it's cold," she cut me off, stepping aside. Vance was in the hallway, leaning against the stairs with his arms folded like he owned the place. He didn't speak, didn't even nod. I set the basket down on the entry table and unzipped my coat. "I brought something for both of you." Silence. Vance's eyes drifted to the gift, but didn't acknowledge it. Marvetta took the basket, looked at it like it was a bag of groceries she didn't order, then walked into the kitchen. I followed, careful not to track any snow across the floor. The house hadn't changed. The same needlepoint "family first" hanging crooked above the mantel. The dent in the lower cabinet where I once bumped it with my skateboard, still there. But something in the air was different, heavier, like the warmth had been sucked out and replaced with cold formality. We ate dinner quietly, mostly leftover ham, dry rolls, and the same bland green beans from every year. Vance only spoke once, something about the new gravel he was laying out back. I tried. God, I tried. Asked about the neighbor's dog, brought up the church renovations she'd mentioned last year. Nothing stuck. Later that night, I sat on the old recliner in the den, flipping through a photo album I found half buried under a pile of dusty cookbooks. My 5th birthday. Me in a cardboard crown. Her arms around me, both of us smiling with frosting on our noses, felt like someone else's life. She walked in around midnight with a glass of wine, sat on the edge of the couch, elbows on her knees. "Ma," I started, careful. "There's something I wanted to talk to you about." She didn't look up. "Go ahead." "I'm in a bit of a situation. Legal. From a business I left last year. I'm fine, mostly, but I might need access to the trust Dad left, just to keep things from going sideways." Silence again. Her knuckles tightened around the wine stem. I continued, slower. "I've been paying your mortgage for the past year. Quietly. Didn't want to make a thing of it. Just wanted you to have peace, you know?" Her expression didn't change. But then Vance's voice came from behind her, low and sharp. "So that's why you're here. Not for family. For money." "No," I said quickly, standing. "It's not like that. I came home because I miss you. I wanted to—" "Save it," she snapped, finally looking at me. Her eyes weren't teary. They were steel. "You always had a way of making yourself look noble while asking for something." I blinked. "What are you talking about?" Vance leaned against the doorframe. "You disappear for months, come crawling back with candles and jam, then start talking about money within 2 hours. Sounds transactional to me." I felt something twist in my chest. "I didn't ask for anything at dinner. I didn't ask for anything when I walked in that door." I've been helping behind the scenes because that's what family does. Marvetta stood abruptly. You think you're owed something because you helped for once? You want a medal? I never wanted anything. She stormed down the hall. I followed, heart pounding. Mom, please, just listen. She turned, eyes blazing. Don't call me that. You always bring drama, Jasper. Always some mess, some fire you expect us to put out. I've kept my mess away from you, I shouted. I came back hoping maybe we could start over. She laughed, bitter. Start over? You were a burden I tolerated. You were never really family. My throat closed. The hallway spun slightly. Vance, she called without turning. Open the front door. He didn't hesitate, just walked over and pulled it wide open. What are you? I started, but she grabbed my arm. Out. I stumbled back as she pushed me toward the porch. Are you serious? Ma, it's freezing out. She didn't stop. Not when my bare feet hit the porch. Not when I tried to hold the frame. Not when I pleaded. Please, just let me get my shoes. My phone? She looked at me once. Just once. You were never my son. And the door slammed. The porch light buzzed above me, flickered, then held steady. Wind cut through my sleep shirt. My hands trembled as I hugged myself, trying to block the chill that wrapped around my ribs like iron bands. My breath fogged up in front of me, each exhale a silent scream. I stood there for a long time. At first I knocked, then I called her name, quietly, then louder. I begged once, just once. When nothing came, I sat, hugged my knees. Let the cold seep into my bones. My pride kept me from trying the door again. In the silence, the memories came like waves I couldn't stop. Fixing the fence when I was 11, trying to make her proud. The soup she made when I was sick. The first and only time she called me baby after I fell off my bike. Was it all just tolerance? I whispered to the darkness. I have no one left. The wind didn't answer. The porch light blinked once more, then stayed on. I sat there until the sun began to rise, and the light didn't warm me. Sleep. By the time the sun cracked through the clouds, my arms were numb, my feet raw, and the inside of my chest felt scraped clean. I stood up from the porch, slowly, every joint stiff like old metal. The street was still quiet. No one had come out, no one had checked. I walked, no shoes, no coat, just my thin shirt and the pants I'd worn to dinner, now creased and wet from the dew. I didn't know where I was going, only that I couldn't stay there, standing in front of a house that had spit me out like I was rotting meat. The post office was a few blocks down, and it opened early. I used to walk past it every morning as a kid. My dad would wave to the clerk, Mrs. Claiborne, said she was the only person in town who still read books with spines. She was there now, older, thinner, her gray hair wrapped in a silk scarf. She stood unlocking the mailbox doors with one gloved hand, a thermos tucked under her arm. She looked up when I approached. Jasper Marin? She blinked. Is that you? I gave her the smallest smile I could manage. Yeah. Morning, Mrs. Claiborne. She stared at my bare feet, my pale lips. Heavens, child, are you all right? Locked out, I lied gently. Late night fight, dumb stuff. She hesitated, then handed me her phone. Use it, and sit down before you fall over. I thanked her and dialed, straight to voicemail. I tried again, and again. No one picked up. My fingers were shaking so hard I almost dropped the phone. She was watching me from inside, behind the glass. I waved a hand, mouthed, thank you, then started walking again. A teenager on a moped slowed beside me, then offered a lift to the main road. I climbed on without a word. In town, I stopped at a gas station and used the ATM inside. I'd set up 2 accounts after Dad passed, one for everyday stuff and another linked to the trust fund he'd set aside before he died. This one was mine. Unquestionably mine. I typed in my PIN and watched as the machine counted out the bills. $120. That was all that was left. I blinked. That couldn't be right. I found a bench behind the station, pulled out my phone, thank God it still had battery, and logged into the fund dashboard. Access denied. This account is currently under internal review. Please contact your trustee for further information. I stared at the screen. My fingers were cold, but not from the weather this time. That trust wasn't hers. It wasn't connected to Marvetta or Vance or even the house. It was tied to my father's will. His name, my name, his lawyer. So how was it frozen? And then I remembered. Last Thanksgiving, she'd poured me a glass of wine. Vance was unusually polite that night. The table had candles, turkey and cranberry sauce. The whole thing felt almost normal. She'd said, "I'm working on tax paperwork for the house. Just sign this so it's easier for the CPA to process your name alongside the estate info." I'd signed, half listening, didn't even read it. She'd made stuffing from scratch for the first time in years. I was just so desperate to keep the peace. God. I pressed my palms into my eyes. My stomach rolled. They'd planned it. They'd known what they were doing. The money didn't matter. Not that way. What burned was the calculation. The slow, methodical way they'd cut me out, smiling through it. I walked 2 blocks to a run-down motel with a neon vacancy sign and handed over the last of the bills. The woman behind the desk didn't ask questions. She gave me a room key, slid it across without looking me in the eye. Inside, the sheets were scratchy. The light flickered. There was a faint smell of mildew, but the lock on the door clicked solid, and for now, that was enough. I sat on the edge of the bed and opened my cloud drive. Years ago, when Dad had gotten sick, I started scanning every document he handed me, just in case. I'd forgotten about most of it. But there it was, one folder titled in his clumsy all caps, "For Jasper." Inside, a scanned will, a letter to the trustee, a notarized form with my name printed clearly beside his signature. It stated I was the sole recipient of the secondary fund. It also had a handwritten note. "If anyone ever questions this, remind them I named you while I was lucid, sober, and furious, and that everything else was just noise." I exhaled. Just sat there with the screen glowing in my lap. The fear didn't lift, but the fog started to part. I opened a new document and began writing to the trustee. Formal. Polite. Clear. I explained the situation, referenced the clause, attached copies. I triple-checked it before sending, then hit submit, and watched the message go. And still, I didn't cry. The pain wasn't wet anymore. It was dry, tight, like skin stretched too far. I lay back on the mattress, hearing every creak of the old springs, and thought about the last thing Dad ever whispered to me, barely able to breathe. "If you ever feel like the house no longer belongs to you, walk away quietly. But remember, the roof may change, but the foundation is still yours." He knew. Somehow, he knew. Plan revenge that day. I planned survival. But survival has a funny way of turning into something else. By mid-morning, the fog had thinned over Eugene. I sat in a coffee shop across from the law office, nursing the same bitter cup for nearly an hour. The heat of it had long faded, but I kept holding the cup between my palms, half for comfort, half because I didn't know what I was about to walk into. I had called the number on the envelope Dad left me. The man who answered, Mr. Elridge, sounded like gravel and patience, said he still had a corner office, though he only came in when he felt like it. I told him it was about Jasper Marin's trust. He paused, said he'd meet me at 10. Now it was 10:07, and my stomach was a knot of sour nerves and raw hope. I crossed the street. The law office looked like it hadn't changed since the early 90s. Green carpeting, oak paneling, those heavy brass nameplates on every door. I followed the hall until I saw his name, Franklin Elridge, Estate Law, of Council. He opened the door before I knocked. "Jasper," he said, holding the door wide, "you look just like your father did in his last days, tired and holding on by the thread of a plan." I gave a tired nod. Close enough. He gestured toward a leather chair, sat behind his desk, and folded his hands. "I assume you're not here for pleasantries." "No, sir." He studied me, then reached into a side drawer and pulled out a thick envelope. It was yellowed around the edges, sealed with wax that had long cracked. "Your father was deliberate, distrusting, even toward the end. But one thing he was not," Elridge said, sliding the envelope across the desk, "was careless." I opened it. The first page was a scanned clause, dense legal language, tiny print, but highlighted in red were the words that stopped my breath. If any modifications are made to the trust agreement without the notarized consent of the primary beneficiary, said trust shall immediately revert into protective status. Access to all assets shall be rerouted, and the initiator of said modification shall be suspended from administrative privileges indefinitely. Below it, my dad's signature. Initials on every page. Elridge leaned back, watching me. "They didn't read it," I whispered. "They never do," he said. "Your stepmother assumed her power over the estate was absolute, but she missed the fine print." I looked up, throat dry. "So the trust isn't gone?" He smiled slightly. "No, Jasper. They thought they locked you out. But what they did, they just locked themselves out instead." The room tilted a little. He pulled out another folder and opened it. "Now, the protective clause froze the original account. That's true. But your father was thorough. There's a fallback, a silent account, separate from the family fund, created in the event you were being, how did he put it?" Elridge squinted, flipping the page. "Financially cornered." I let out a breath, almost a laugh. "He knew?" "Of course he did," Elridge said, matter of fact. "He wrote this when you were still living in Boston. Told me if they ever treat him like a convenience, not a son, this account becomes his escape hatch." I sat there, overwhelmed. My hands had gone cold again, but for a different reason now. Elridge continued. "To activate it, I need proof. Something that shows financial coercion, exclusion, misrepresentation. Can you provide that?" I nodded slowly. "I have scanned documents, contracts, bank statements, call logs." "Good," he said. "We'll need all of it. If your father's conditions are met, I can open the fallback account under your control in 72 hours. He handed me a USB stick. "Drop everything here, encrypted. I'll do the rest." I slid the stick into my laptop, dragged over everything I had. I even included screenshots from my mother's texts, the ones that shifted from cold to mocking to, eventually, desperate. "Do you need the voicemail records too?" He looked up. "Voicemail?" "She called me 107 times last night," I said, "after she realized the wire transfer didn't go through." His brow arched. "Leave them on the drive." As the files uploaded, I noticed a framed photo on the corner of his desk. It was old, black and white. My dad, much younger, standing beside Elridge. Both men in suits. My dad had one hand resting on a briefcase and a cigarette between his fingers. "He trusted you," I said. Elridge looked at the photo. "He did." "Why?" He shrugged. "Because I told him once, money isn't protection. Knowing when to walk away, that's protection." I sat with that for a moment. Elridge pushed a form across the desk. "This will give you private access to the fallback account, pending verification. It'll be sealed until then. Once it's active, Only you can authorize movement. I signed. He watched me carefully. What do you plan to do next? I didn't answer right away, because honestly, I didn't know. I didn't have a plan beyond getting back what was mine and finding a place where I wasn't a burden, a placeholder, or a punching bag for someone else's insecurities. But I remembered something Dad once told me. Back when I was a kid sitting by the fireplace while he wrote out trust drafts on yellow pads. Real power isn't loud. It waits, and then it moves all at once. He wasn't warning me. He was preparing me. And it hit me all at once. This wasn't my revenge story. This was his legacy playing out, step by step, like a quiet symphony only he could hear. Every page he signed, every clause he tucked away, it wasn't paranoia, it was love, just his version of it. I stood to leave, folder in hand. Thank you, I said, voice quiet but firm. Elridge gave me a long look. Be smart, Jasper. There's a difference between reclaiming what's yours and becoming what you escaped. I nodded. Outside, the air smelled like rain even though the sun was out. I walked down the steps into the buzz of late-morning traffic. The folder in my hand wasn't thick, but it felt heavy, like the shift of something permanent. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I left the office with nothing but a folder, and the quiet knowledge that the game had already turned. I didn't go straight home. Something in me needed movement, air, noise that didn't echo like a courthouse hallway. So I walked. Past closed storefronts. Past couples arguing quietly over dinner checks. Past the bookstore where Dad used to take me after soccer games, telling me, a sharp mind is your best insurance. The folder in my hand felt heavier with each block. Not physically, but morally. Every step I took away from Elridge's office, I could feel my spine straightening in ways I hadn't realized it had bent. When I finally got back to my apartment, the sun was long down, and the sky was doing that slow, bruised fade to black. I dropped the folder on the kitchen table, sat down, and stared at my laptop for a long minute. Then I opened the drive. I hadn't touched the family's financial documents in months. Not since my mother locked me out of the accounts and said the board had concerns about my reliability. That was code for, you're not useful anymore. But I'd kept copies of everything I had access to before they shut me out. And now, I had a reason to look again, with eyes that weren't afraid to see what they didn't want to believe. The grant entries were the first thing that caught my attention. Dozens of them, labeled as community development or minority education assistance, processed monthly from the main family fund. I didn't recognize the account numbers they were going to, and I knew every nonprofit we had ever funded. These were strangers. I opened a spreadsheet and started logging them. By midnight, I'd tracked 17 different accounts that had received grants over the past 14 months. Most of them led to LLCs with names like Silver Prairie Initiative or Haven Way Foundation, nothing traceable on IRS public charity databases. One of them had an address registered to a house in eastern Oregon. I checked the county records. The house was under Marvetta Dunley, my mother, and not under her legal name. It was buried under a shell organization listed as a youth outreach nonprofit. There were no websites, no board members, just her name, and a quiet history of monthly deposits that added up to nearly $140,000. I sat back and rubbed my eyes. She used the emergency trust funds, the ones meant for community relief or urgent family needs, to pay herself through a fake nonprofit. I opened another batch of transfers. One caught my eye. It was labeled Legal Restitution, closed file. The amount? $6,700 monthly. The recipient? A woman named Bethany Croft. It hit me after a second. That was Vance's ex-wife. I ran a background check on the address. Sure enough, Vance's ex had been receiving payouts for over a year. No legal case was listed, no judgment. Just quiet transfers labeled as restitution for something that apparently never happened. I clicked into my encrypted email and drafted a message to a fraud investigator I once worked with when I still handled part of the foundation's logistics. I didn't say it was my family, just that I'd uncovered a pattern of suspicious disbursements disguised as grants and requested anonymous verification. She got back to me in 20 minutes. "These are not associated with any licensed nonprofits," she wrote. "If this is coming from a charitable trust, you could be looking at misappropriation, possibly federal violations if the intent was to avoid tax audits." My hands hovered above the keys. This was no longer about being cut out of the estate. They weren't just excluding me. They were laundering money, using the Marin name to do it. I sat frozen for a while, then remembered something Dad once told me. Late at night, in the den, after a particularly nasty fight between him and Mom. I must have been 17. He had that look in his eyes, tired but sharp, and he told me, "If anything ever happens to me, there's a fallback list. You'll know it when you see it. Hidden in the fireproof box. You're the only one named." I hadn't thought about that in years, but I had the scanned copy of the box's contents. Dad gave it to me on a flash drive before he got sick. Said it was for emergencies only. I opened it now. Inside, a document called Silent Disbursement List, 2014. It was meant to help struggling families in our area during hard times. Single moms, vet-owned small businesses, things like that. It was never meant to be touched unless there was surplus left untouched by the board. They'd drained it dry. The names Dad had carefully written: the barber with a disabled daughter, the bakery owner who'd fed us during winter storms. None of them had received a dime. But someone had used the list to justify similar-looking payments. They twisted it. They knew the structure and used the old language to hide their theft. I updated Elridge the next morning. His voice changed after I told him what I found. "This is no longer just breach of trust," he said. "It could be criminal misappropriation. And if your stepmother was aware—" "She wasn't just aware," I cut in. "She engineered it. She's been managing the fund herself for months." He went quiet for a moment. "You need to document everything. Carefully. Do not confront her yet. Pull everything together. Then we talk options." I agreed. I spent the next 6 hours cataloging every transaction, labeling each suspicious transfer, and compiling the fake grant entries, every receipt, every memo, every shell company registration I could tie back to someone in my family. It was just past 8 p.m. when I sat back and looked at the full master file, 97 pages, 74 attachments. My inheritance wasn't just taken. It had been funneled out, piece by piece, to protect a lifestyle built on illusion and fraud. I leaned back and stared at the ceiling. In my mind, I saw the lake house again. The wooden dock where my dad used to teach me how to skip stones, the smell of old pine and wet rope, Mom standing by the deck with a glass of wine, laughing like she'd earned every inch of that world. Had she always known? Had everything been a lie from the start? I didn't want revenge, but I was done being the silent funding source for their delusions. I scheduled a call with the trustee for Monday and signed the request to reassign full control. I didn't sleep much after sending the control transfer notice. Just paced around my small rented room, listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the ticking wall clock that was always half a second off. Around 2 a.m., I made tea, though I didn't really drink it. I was wide awake, but not alert, more like suspended, waiting for something I couldn't name. Then, right before 6 a.m., my phone buzzed. Just once, then again, and again. By the time I reached for it, there were already 11 missed calls. I hadn't even made it to the kitchen sink before it jumped to 19. I turned off autoblock earlier that morning, on purpose. Some part of me needed to hear what they'd say once the shift became real, once the papers landed, once the money stopped. When I finally opened the screen, the number made me stop breathing for a second. 107 missed calls, 97 from Marvetta, 8 from unknown numbers, 2 from Vance, and 1 from a number I hadn't seen in years. My dad's old hospital liaison, the woman who used to call every time his medication needed adjusting or when he asked for something only Jasper can explain. But first, I listened to the voicemails. The first one was short. "Jasper, it's your mother. Call me back. Please." The second came 10 minutes later. "I didn't mean it, okay? That night, I was just overwhelmed. You misunderstood me." The third had more bite. "You know how Vance is. He was pressuring me. You always think I have power in this family. I don't, Jasper." By the fourth, the mask had fallen completely. "Don't do anything stupid. You're ruining this family. You always had a way of blowing things up when you don't get your way." Then came the quiet one. Just her voice, barely a whisper. "I did what I had to. You never made things easy. You were always so cold." I sat down at the tiny kitchen table and stared at the wall. Cold. I remembered begging her on the porch that night, my feet bare on the wooden planks, the cold seeping through my skin. And her, turning, shutting the door like I was a stranger trying to sell her something she didn't want. My tea had gone cold. I stared at the cup, like the steam might come back if I looked long enough. Then the phone rang again. Same number I didn't recognize earlier. The one from the hospital system. I answered. "Hello? Jasper?" The voice on the other end was cautious, feminine, professional. "This is Dr. Kelton. I was your father's palliative liaison." I cleared my throat. "Yes, I remember. Is everything okay?" "Well, I'm not really supposed to contact family directly anymore, but something unusual came across my desk, a dependency petition filed under your name, from your mother." I froze. "What kind of petition?" "It claims you've required supervised oversight for financial decisions since age 21 due to an alleged history of mood instability and impulsive behavior." My pulse spiked, but my voice stayed calm. "That's a lie." She sounded uncomfortable. "I thought so. That's why I wanted to confirm." The submission included letters from a therapist named Dr. Glenn Morrow. But, Jasper, I checked. There is no Dr. Glenn Morrow in our system, and none of the dates line up with your known records. Can you send it to me? I already did. Check your email. Jasper. This was submitted the day after you were removed from the estate. My mouth felt dry. Thank you for calling. I hung up. The PDF hit my inbox 3 minutes later, 26 pages of carefully forged notes, diagnoses that never happened, evaluations signed with the name of someone who didn't exist, handwritten notes in slanted cursive that tried too hard to look like a real doctor's script. And at the bottom of the packet, a cover letter from Marvetta Dunley Marin, declaring her continued concern for Jasper's mental fitness and financial stability, citing erratic behavior and a history of delusional thinking related to inheritance. I didn't cry, didn't scream. I just sat back and let the nausea roll through me like a wave that didn't bother knocking. At 8:12 a.m., I called Elridge. When he picked up, his voice was sharp and alert. "They moved, didn't they?" "Faster than I expected," I said. "They filed a dependency report." "Jesus," he muttered. "Do you have it?" "I have the whole thing. Forged notes, a fake doctor, all of it." "Do you want to go public?" I looked out the window. The sun was just cresting over the city skyline, brushing rooftops with gold that didn't belong to anyone. "No," I said. "I want this quiet. I want it to burn without smoke. I want them to feel it in the empty inbox, the empty balance, the silence." Elridge exhaled slowly. "I can work with that." I spent the next 4 hours printing copies of the report. One went into a thick envelope addressed to the board of the Marin Educational Fund, Dad's old pride and joy. Another was marked for the HOA president in Mom's neighborhood, the woman who lived for community integrity. And the last, I dropped off personally, at the church where Mom sat front pew every Sunday in her pearls, nodding at the pastor like she had nothing to confess. No signature, no return address, just a copy of the truth they'd tried to write without me. I ended the day back downtown, at the same cafe I'd sat in when Dad told me I was the only one he trusted with the fallback list. I took the window seat this time. Outside, a young boy was holding his dad's hand, pointing at pigeons on the sidewalk and laughing like it was the most important thing in the world. His dad leaned down, grinning. I watched them for longer than I meant to, then whispered to myself, all I ever wanted was to belong. I picked up my coffee. But maybe being forgotten was the only way to finally see them for who they were. The streetlights flickered on, and just before I stood to leave, I felt my phone buzz again. Only once. I glanced down. Unknown number. Voicemail. No message. The next morning, I got a knock at my rented door. Soft, but steady, familiar. I didn't even have to check the peephole. I knew that knock. It was hers. She knocked once, then waited. No pounding, no frantic buzzing like the voicemails. Just that one knock, soft, calculated, too familiar. I stood behind the door longer than I should have, hand on the knob, watching her silhouette shift slightly through the frosted glass. She was holding something, probably coffee. She always brought coffee when she wanted something. I opened the door. Hi, sweetheart, she said, as if we were picking up from some pleasant Sunday brunch. I figured you might not have had breakfast yet, so I brought your favorite vanilla oat milk, no foam. I didn't say anything, just stepped aside and let her in. She looked around like she was appraising the space, the small kitchen, the plain furniture. She spotted the dusty piano in the corner and made a quiet sound in her throat, like disappointment. You always had such talent, she murmured. It's a shame you stopped playing. I closed the door gently behind her. You didn't come here to talk about music. Her eyes flicked to mine, just for a second. Then she moved toward the table like she owned it, placed the coffee down, sat. You look tired, she offered, tone sweet, concerned. Are you eating okay? You used to forget when things got overwhelming. I pulled out the chair across from her but didn't sit. Why are you here? She gave a tight smile. I just wanted to talk. No lawyers, no yelling. Just you and me. I finally sat. She folded her hands over each other like a pastor about to offer grace. Families go through hard times. You know that. Your father was never easy. And raising you alone after he passed, it took everything I had. I stared at her. He didn't pass. He died 8 years after you kicked me out. She blinked. Recovered. You know what I meant. I didn't respond. Let her fill the silence. She did. I was under a lot of pressure back then. Vance. He was trying to take over everything. And I was just trying to keep things together. You weren't making it easy, Jasper. I kept my voice flat. I was 23. I was grieving. You threw me out for not agreeing to co-sign a second mortgage on a house that was already paid off. That wasn't the whole story. I raised my hand. She went quiet. I'm not here to rehash the past, she said, recovering her smile. I wanted to talk about the house. There it was. She leaned forward slightly. We're falling behind on the taxes. The neighborhood fees have doubled. Technically, it's still under the family trust. And since you filed the transfer papers, well, there's been confusion. I looked at her calmly. There's no confusion. But the deed was finalized last week. The trust is sealed. You were removed as a trustee. You knew this. You got the letter." She went still. I leaned back. "I let you come here. I let you speak. But you're not going to rewrite this part. Not again." Her mouth tightened. "I sacrificed everything for you. You think I didn't lose things? I gave up my life for this family." "No," I said quietly. "You gave up me for a version of a family you could control." Her eyes flashed. "I don't deserve this treatment. I was your mother." "You were a mother to Romy," I said. "To Vance. To the image. Not to me." She looked like she wanted to scream. Instead, she stood up. "You always twist everything. You always make me the villain." I stood, too. Calm. Steady. "You forged a psychiatric evaluation to try and take control of the estate again," I said. "You filed it behind my back, lied about diagnoses that never happened, and used a fake doctor." She didn't deny it. I opened the door. "You're not in control anymore," I said softly. "And that's the part you can't stand." She didn't move at first. Then she reached for her purse, straightened her coat, and walked out without a word. I closed the door behind her and locked it, not because I feared her, but because I didn't want her walking back in like nothing had changed. I didn't do anything for a few minutes, just stood there, letting the silence settle back into the apartment. It felt fuller than it had when she was sitting across from me, spinning her web of excuses. Later that day, I drove back to the old house. Not out of sentiment, more like a form of confirmation. The driveway was empty, the lights were off. The porch still creaked underfoot the same way it had when I was 15, sneaking out to meet friends on the weekends. I stepped inside with the keys I now legally held. No alarm blared, no voices argued, no footsteps ran overhead, just quiet. In the hall, I paused near the vent. I remembered the night I stood there, hidden, listening to her whisper, "He's just baggage. We're raising someone else's mistake." That had been the beginning of the end. I walked into the library. The air still smelled like leather and varnish. Books lined the shelves, untouched. The same copy of Steinbeck sat on the side table, a folded corner still marking the page. I didn't sit, just stood in the center of the room. It wasn't grief anymore. Not anger, either. Just stillness. I whispered into the space. "Now, it's just air." And it was. Whatever spell this house had cast, it had finally broken. On the way out, I passed the piano in the den. I ran my fingers gently along the top, not to play, just to feel the dust. I didn't take anything, didn't need to. As I pulled the door shut behind me, the lock clicked on its own. Not by magic, just by time. I drove back in the soft dark of early evening, headlights catching every curve of the road I used, to know blindfolded. I didn't change the locks that day. I didn't need to. The doors already knew who belonged there. The next morning, just past 8, a knock came again. This time, not rushed, not desperate, just solid, grounded. 3 firm taps. Through the glass, I saw a man I hadn't seen in years. Pastor Delgrove. He looked older, but still stood straight, clean-shaven as always, with a worn leather briefcase clutched in both hands. No pleasantries, no coffee. When I opened the door, he gave a single nod. "Jasper," he said. "It's time." I stepped aside. The way he moved reminded me of a man carrying something heavy, not physically, but in spirit. He waited until I closed the door before setting the briefcase down on the table like it might crack open on its own. "You might want to sit." I did. He sat across from me, unsnapping the case slowly. Inside, under a folded wool cloth, was a thick envelope, yellowed slightly. My name, handwritten across it, Jasper Marin. the handwriting I hadn't seen since I was 21. My father's. Pastor Delgrove placed the envelope on the table between us. Your father gave me instructions. I was to deliver this only if you were ever formally removed from the family. I said nothing, just stared at the envelope. He believed in timing, Delgrove continued. He said, if they ever try to erase him, that's when he'll need this the most. I reached for it slowly, thumb running along the edge. You're sure? I asked. This isn't some attempt to pull me back into their mess? No, Delgrove said simply. It's your inheritance. Not just money, the rest. I opened the envelope. Inside were 2 items, a notarized amendment to the original trust and a handwritten letter. The amendment had a clause, one I'd never known existed. It transferred all remaining land rights, mineral royalties, and voting shares tied to the community board, directly to me, effective immediately upon formal expulsion from the family. There was also language granting me sole authority over final legacy decisions, including the right to reverse past proxy votes cast by my mother or her husband. I folded the paper slowly, hands steady. Then I opened the letter. The handwriting was unmistakable. If they choose exile, then they choose silence. You'll know what to do. Don't let them shame you into giving up what's yours. Love is action, not performance. Keep your head clear. And Jasper, don't argue with ghosts. Dad. My eyes stung, but I didn't cry. I was too far past that line. I looked up at Delgrove. How soon can we make this public? He reached back into the briefcase, pulled out a sealed packet. I already scheduled time on the next community agenda. Tonight, 6 p.m. Did they know I'd be coming? Marvetta will be there. She thinks the meeting's about a zoning appeal. But once we file this, he tapped the folder. The board will see everything. I nodded. Then we go. That evening, I pulled into the gravel lot outside the community board hall just after sunset. The building wasn't grand, just an old meeting room next to the fire station, with plastic chairs and a hand-painted sign that still read, "Welcome, neighbors." Inside, a few dozen people were already seated. Familiar faces. Some I remembered from childhood neighborhood barbecues. Others, distant relatives of my mother's church friends, all of them pretending not to notice when I walked in. Marvetta sat near the front, perfectly done up in one of her crisp navy blazers, pearls gleaming like teeth. Vance was beside her, scrolling his phone. Neither of them looked at me. That was fine. Delgrove and I sat quietly toward the back. The meeting droned through updates on storm drain repairs, a debate over trash pickup schedules, and a short discussion about the upcoming fall festival. Then the chairperson, a woman named Marla, who used to bring me apple muffins after school, cleared her throat. Next on the docket, an update from Pastor Delgrove regarding trust governance and board voting rights tied to the Marin estate. A murmur went through the room. Delgrove stood. Thank you, Marla. I'll keep this brief. He walked to the front, holding the document like a ledger of final truth. He turned to the board. Per the instructions left by Thomas Marin, this sealed addendum was to be delivered only under one condition: if his son, Jasper Marin, was formally removed from the family trust or disowned by its surviving members. Another ripple. A few heads turned toward me. Delgrove continued. That event has occurred. Therefore, effective immediately, all remaining entitlements, land deeds, mineral rights, community voting shares, transfer to Jasper Marin. A gasp. Someone dropped a pen. He opened the letter and read aloud. I, Thomas Marin, entrust my legacy to the one who chose family when family did not choose him. Gasps turned into silence. Even Marvetta, for all her steel, blinked twice. Her knuckles whitened on her armrest. Vance stared, mouth slightly open. Delgrove handed the packet to the board. All documentation is certified and filed. As executor, I affirm the transfer. Jasper now holds voting authority on any motions tied to estate-affiliated zoning, planning, and historical landmark protections. Marla looked at me, unsure. I stood, slowly, walked to the front. The room felt too warm, too still. I cleared my throat. I won't waste your time, I said. I'm not here for revenge. I'm here to honor what my father left, not just to me, but to this community. For too long, decisions have been made behind closed doors by people protecting their own image. I paused. I won't be like that. Then I turned to Marvetta. I don't need your apology. But you'll no longer speak for this estate. She opened her mouth. I raised a hand. This isn't a negotiation, and I walked out. Outside, the parking lot buzzed with murmurs and hurried footsteps behind me. I didn't turn to look at her. Not when she called my name. Not when she ran after me, heels clicking across the asphalt. Not even when her voice cracked. I kept walking, because there was a difference between leaving something behind and finally being free of it. And I'd earned my silence. I didn't turn to look at her, even when she ran after me in the parking lot. But I did stop walking. Behind me, I heard the uneven stutter of heels against loose gravel. Then her voice, smaller than I remembered, but still sharp around the edges, like a cracked teacup trying to look whole. Please, she called out. Jasper, please, just let me explain. I turned slowly. There she was, Marvetta Marin. The woman who used to correct my posture at dinner and smooth her skirt like it meant something. Now standing there with wind-frizzed hair and eyes that no longer held certainty, just panic. She stepped forward. I made a mistake. I didn't speak. Her chin quivered. You don't understand. Vance, he pressured me. He said you were turning the family against us, that you were dangerous. I stayed still. I wanted her to keep talking, let her unravel. I didn't mean for things to go this far, she said. I was scared. You weren't scared, I said, calm as I could manage. You were proud. That night on the porch, you looked me in the eye and said I was just a burden you tolerated. She flinched like I'd slapped her. She tried, but I'd already pulled out my phone. A few taps, then the recording played. Her voice, unmistakable, cold, exact. The tone she used when she locked the pantry as punishment, when she'd sigh at the sight of my report cards, even if they were decent. You're not part of this family anymore. You were just a burden I tolerated. It echoed in the lot. Even the cicadas stopped. She stared at the phone like it was possessed. Then her knees dipped like they might give. I didn't know you. You never thought I'd make it far enough to matter, I said. That's what you didn't know. Her hands reached for me, slow and trembling. I stepped back, slipped the phone into my coat. Then I opened the car door. She looked like she might crumble right there. But I wasn't there to sweep anything up. I got in and closed the door gently, drove off without rushing, her reflection shrinking in the rear view. By the time I got home, the weight in my chest wasn't rage. It was the cold clarity of memory. How many nights I'd laid awake wishing she'd just come knock and say she was sorry, even once. But she never did, until it cost her something. And that's not apology. That's strategy. I placed the phone on the table, sat for a minute, then I logged into the forum. One only trustees of the Marin Foundation had access to. Private, silent, unassuming. I uploaded the audio file, titled it simply, Porch, 2:14 a.m. Marvetta. Along with it, I typed 2 short lines. This is for the record. I hereby resign from all ceremonial roles effective immediately. Legal entitlements remain active. No anger, no theatrics. I clicked submit, and that was it. The next morning, the emails started trickling in before 8 a.m. I didn't answer any of them. By 10, the forum had quietly locked the thread due to sudden traffic spikes. And by noon, an anonymous source had submitted the audio, unaltered, to the local paper. The headline went live just before lunch. Philanthropic matriarch disgraced by son's audio reveal, "You were just a burden." I read it once, then closed the tab. Later that afternoon, Marvetta tried to post a clarifying message to the same trustee forum. It was performative, to say the least. She talked about the complexities of maternal grief, about deeply personal family struggles, and how her words had been taken out of context. But no one replied. Not even the board members who used to sing her praises, not even her inner circle from church who called her a pillar. It was just silence, the kind that weighs more than any insult. That night, I sat on the floor with the lights off, knees bent, back against the couch. The room hummed with quiet. Outside, a dog barked once. Then nothing. I replayed the audio one last time, not for proof. I didn't need that anymore. But because sometimes hearing the lie out loud sets you free from wondering if you imagined it. And in that moment, I felt it. Not peace, not revenge, just space. Like I could finally breathe without her expectations filling my lungs. The next day, Vance posted a photo of Marvetta standing in front of a food pantry donation box, holding up a check, smiling, like none of it happened. The caption read, "Forgiveness starts at home. We all stumble." But she called her son a burden? After taking money from his inheritance for years? Typical. They'd with me. Some people don't regret what they did. They regret being recorded. I didn't respond. I didn't share the post. I didn't even block her, because the point wasn't to ruin her. It was to stop carrying her. Later that evening, my phone buzzed with 107 missed calls, all from her number. I didn't pick up. Not the first call, not the 57th, not the last. Some ghosts you don't invite back, even if they sob at the door, even if they finally say your name the way they should have years ago. Forgiveness is earned, not begged, and sometimes silence is the only answer left to give. To go to the family gathering that weekend, but fate had other ideas. It started with a message from May. Just 3 words. "You should come." I stared at it for a while, thumb hovering over the reply. She didn't ask me to come for our mother, or to be the bigger person. She said, "For us." So that Sunday afternoon, I found myself driving the winding road toward the lake house where our family's reunions had been held for decades. Same red shutters, same overgrown hydrangeas at the mailbox, same wide porch where so many things had been said and unsaid. I parked farther down the gravel drive, not wanting to draw attention. My palms felt clammy against the steering wheel. For a moment, I almost backed out. But then I remembered. This wasn't about them anymore. May met me halfway up the walk, holding 2 mugs of something steaming. She smiled as if nothing had ever fractured between us. "Chamomile with honey," she said. "For your nerves." "Thoughtful," I said, accepting it. She didn't ask how I'd been, didn't mention the recording, just walked beside me toward the house like we were kids again, sneaking out to catch fireflies. Inside, laughter floated from the dining room, muffled by the thick wood door. I paused in the entryway, took a breath, then pushed it open. It was like someone pressed pause. Forks frozen mid-air, heads turning. Elridge raised his glass in silent acknowledgement. Aunt Genevieve looked down at her lap. Marvetta, seated at the far end, dressed in navy like she was still the matriarch, blinked rapidly, as if trying to make sense of my presence. No one said a word. I took an empty chair near the middle of the table, not at the end, not on the outskirts, right in the center. May passed the bread basket like nothing was wrong. Ivy, her daughter, offered me a timid smile across the table. I smiled back. Conversation resumed, awkward at first, stumbling and stalling, but slowly found its legs again. People started chatting about work, vacations, a new bakery that opened downtown. And Marvetta stayed silent. For once, she didn't command the room, didn't lead the prayer or correct someone's grammar. She just sat there, her fork tracing lines across her plate. Then Uncle Ron clinked his glass and stood. "How about a toast?" he said. "Feels like we've all grown a bit this year." A few polite chuckles. He turned to me. "Jasper, would you say a few words?" I felt every eye shift my way. I stood, not out of defiance, but because silence had already done enough damage. I looked past the people who'd once avoided me, past the woman who'd slammed a door in my face. My gaze landed instead on the youngest ones at the table, Ivy, Cade, Elise. "I used to think family meant blood," I began, "that it had to. But sometimes, blood can run cold." A few heads tilted. No one interrupted. "Then family is not who shares your last name," I continued. "It's who shows up when you're barefoot in the cold, when your knees are bleeding and your voice is small. It's the people who pull you in when others shut the door." The room was still, not hostile, just listening. I nodded. "To those who opened the door, and to those who never will, I wish you peace, even still." I sat down. May started clapping, then Ivy, then Elridge. Soon, even a few aunts joined in. Marvetta didn't move. Her hands stayed folded tightly in her lap. After dessert, I stepped outside. The porch boards creaked beneath my steps, same spot, same grain in the wood. I leaned on the railing, letting the lake air cool my skin, a soft tug at my jacket. It was Ivy, holding a napkin with smudged chocolate on it. "Is it true?" she asked. "About the park and the animals? Mom said you helped save them." I smiled, crouching to meet her eye level. "It's true." She grinned. "That's really cool." "And it's yours now," I said gently, handing her a small envelope. "I made sure of that." She opened it. Inside was a certificate with her name, appointing her as a junior future trustee for the conservation grant I'd built from the old Marin estate money. Not a blood heir, but someone I chose. Her eyes lit up. "Really?" I nodded. "Really." She threw her arms around my neck. I let the moment settle, quiet and full. As she ran back inside to show her mom, I stayed on the porch, hands tucked into my coat pockets, watching the lake shift under the breeze. "She called me a burden," I whispered into the air. "But burdens don't rebuild legacies. Burdens don't get 107 calls in one night. I wasn't thrown out of the family. I walked into the truth, and sometimes, the only way home is forward." Do you think I was cruel? For letting her knock and never opening the door? Or was that the only kind